Hi, welcome. We will start in just about 2 minutes here. We've got about 80 people registered, and they usually start flowing in right at the top of the hour. I appreciate everyone staying on mute as we just about get ready to kick this off. Hopefully all is well. Fantastic. If I could carry a single note and string that into a tune, I would entertain as we get started on these, but I'm afraid we would lose just about everyone. I do need to come up with some type of comedy shtick, I think, as we are waiting for everyone to come in. So it's a little more entertaining. If you are intending to be on Cerius HR today, you are absolutely in the right place. We started these probably about March of this year. We help companies and we place a number of interim CHROs along with other roles such as finance operations, marketing, and sales. But along with that, and how we keep our network up to date, as well as how we are able to get the attention of those small to mid-sized business owners that generally only pop their head out when they're looking for information. We do a lot of content. We really do thought leadership as part of staying on top of the trends. So when you look at given the rate of change and the talent-driven nature of the workforce of the future, we have seen an increased trend of companies needing to level up their human capital capabilities. This is resulting in HR as one of the fastest evolving areas of a company, and we want to make sure that it is easy for all of us to stay up to date on the latest changes, the latest trends, and how CEOs really need to be supported from HR leadership perspective. So to help accomplish this, we created Cerius HR Today. And in this month's session, where this came from is I was in a number of CEO conversations over the past 3 to 4 months as they were saying, I'd like to have an assessment tool. What should I do? And it started with, well, what's the purpose? Well, I just want to measure everyone. What do you want to measure them about, against? And there was a lot of education that needed to happen. And I think so many tools have come about, as well as leveraging AI as part of those tools. It was a great time to be able to go seek out an expert to give us the lay of the land. I've seen companies use them in various ways, from simple implementation to company-wide integration. There is a lot of misinformation on the types of tools, their capabilities, and now how they can be used throughout the employee's life cycle. So to provide some background and to answer a lot of these questions about the tools and kind of teach us how to educate business owners and leadership teams, I've invited Stephanie Licata to join us today. Stephanie is a learning and leadership development coach and consultant. If she isn't working with companies, helping them evaluate and implement talent assessments, she's training and certifying leaders and coaches on various tools. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Stephanie as we get going here.
Excellent. So welcome, everyone. I'm excited to be here today and to share with you some of this helpful information about assessment. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. And this will be interactive. So if you have experience with certain assessments, we obviously know there are so many assessments out there and we can't touch on every single one of them. But I'm going to be sharing with you some of my experience and some of how I've helped organizations implement assessments into their talent strategy. My background's in the field of organizational psychology, and then I also am an ICF certified coach. But I probably spent about 70% doing training and organizational development consulting, and about 30% of my time coaching. So I've used these assessments embedded with learning initiatives, embedded with coaching initiatives, embedding with organizational development or culture turnaround initiatives. And so I'm excited again to share with you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So I'll share with you our agenda. We're going to explore different types of assessments. there's not just one type of assessment that measures one thing. So we'll talk about the different types. Then we'll also talk about what certain assessments measure. So I'm going to go through and highlight the assessments that I'm most familiar with. I am certified in 16 types or MBTI, Enneagram, and DISC. And then I do have some experience with Clifton Strengths, so I'll share a little bit about that as well. But I'm going to be sharing about other assessments as well. We'll deep dive into those few. Then we're going to talk about how do you evaluate which assessments to use in different team and organizational scenarios. So for the ones I'm going to deep dive in, I'm going to be sharing some scenarios that I've used the assessments in. And then I'd love to hear from you about maybe some creative ways you've used any of these assessments. Then we're going to talk about how to incorporate assessment data into the employee life cycle. So I'm really committed to assessments not being a one and done experience, not being just sort of a workshop and then have a nice day. We really have to get the most for our investment in some of these assessments. So how do we incorporate them throughout the employee life cycle? Then I'll share with you a few tools to explore. Some tools I've worked with directly, some tools I've worked with organizations who've successfully implemented them. I'll also have you consider an assessment use roadmap for an organization. I'm going to present some questions that I say to consider. And if you want a more formal resource about how to evaluate which assessment to use, I can share that with you if you want to connect with me. And then I want to hear your insights, your questions, and we'll go from there. I'm going to share with you a couple of different assessment types, but before I do that, I want to address that there's usually a big debate in my field of organizational psychology and organizational development about the use of assessment. So the way I like to frame assessments is that they're a point of reference to consider. They're not an exact science. They are not the truth, right? So when something is not the truth, I don't have to argue with it. I can just say, hey, this is relevant. This isn't. I'll take what's relevant and what's useful, and I'll toss out the rest. So I tell people not to struggle so much with the assessment results. If something does not pertain to you, because we know it's not an exact science, then just ignore it. Take the things that are really valuable. So I'm going to kind of go through some of these types of assessments. So first we have personality assessments, assessments that really measure aspects of one's personality. So many of these you might have heard of, MBTI or 16 types, the Myers-Briggs assessment or 16 types, Enneagram, which is very hot right now, which I'll share with you a little bit more about that. Then we have the Hogan assessment. We have the Big Five assessment, which I've used extensively and I used in my graduate work as well. So these measure aspects of our personality. And then there are some authors or researchers who then take that and map that onto organizational participation. We also have assessments that are more about our behavior. These are DISC, predictive index, Belbin team roles. That's based on the work of Dr. Meredith Belbin, who observed behavior in an organization to identify what are the roles that need to be filled for an organization or a team to be successful. And then insights discovery. And I have a little asterisk there because insights discovery is both personality and behavioral. It usually requires you to be in a group setting to then evaluate that behavior. We also have strengths assessments. This includes things like VIA Strengths, Clifton Strengths, which used to be called Strengths Finder. So if you are familiar with Strengths Finder, it's now called Clifton Strengths. There's also Strengths Scope, and then the Kolbe Index. And the Kolbe Index is an assessment that I used when I was in an organization as a tool in sort of screening for roles. Kolbe is one of the only assessments that is evaluated and vetted for any kind of hiring. We do not use assessments to make hiring decisions, to make distinctions about people, to evaluate performance. These are not decision-making tools. They are perspective tools. So I'd like to hear from a few of you in the chat. What are some of your favorite assessments? Maybe I mentioned it here. Maybe I didn't. Maybe you have a favorite one that you've used, you've had a lot of experience with. Pop it in the chat. Let us know. What are the assessments that you really like? Okay, predictive index, Harrison assessments, EQ, excellent. Insights discovery and Hogan, MBTI, Hogan. Value, strengths, and derailers from Hogan is very powerful. I did some work with that in my graduate program as well. Hogan, we're good. leadership circle file. Oh, the TKI, I use the TKI a lot, the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. It's super valuable. Hogan in the Big Five, yes. I really like the Big Five. For some reason, people just want MBTI. I would prefer to use the Big Five. Okay, the CCL suite of assessments, excellent. Process communication model, excellent. A lot of great assessments here that people are using and familiar with. So some of these are the most requested that I get from organizations. No matter how much I try to say, how about this? Or how about let's try this? Sometimes they tend to ask for the most commonly used assessments, right? And so I usually kind of, go with the flow. I make recommendations, but ultimately the client makes that decision. So I'm going to be going through some of the background of some of these assessments, because sometimes where did these come from, right? And then I'm going to be sharing some scenarios. So the Myers-Briggs type indicator was actually developed during World War II by Catherine Cook Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers. It's based on Carl Jung's theory of psychological types. And Jung's 1921 book introduced introversion, extroversion, and then the 4 cognitive functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. Briggs and Myers expanded on these concepts and then created a tool for identifying personality types. And it was first published in 1962. And it's widely used in psychology, in education, and organizational development to really understand differences in preferences, right? So 16 types or MBTI is focused on personal preferences. If a person knows their MBTI results, you know what types of tasks you might be good at, but you might not know necessarily how to work on those tasks alongside others. So it actually is not a team assessment. It can be used with teams, but it really doesn't show that behavioral aspect that DISC does. So 16 types boils personalities down to a matter of our preferences. It does not measure traits, ability, or character. And so the results ultimately describe a person's sort of nature. What are they more inclined to do? How do they interact with the world? They either are introverted or extroverted. Now, introversion and extroversion is one of the most misunderstood concepts. We think introversion means shy and extroversion means outgoing, and it's really not that. It's really more about where you get your source of energy from. Do you get your energy from being with people, extroverted, or from being alone? So what I'll always say to teams that have a high level or high amount of introverts is go ask your introverts what they thought about the meeting 3 hours after it, because they're now re-energized, right? After that meeting, they might have felt like they needed a nap, right? So I'll often work with teams and how they can customize how they work with their teams based upon that split. I just also want to point your attention to that these scores that you get on this assessment, and particularly in this introversion extroversion scale, they're on a scale of 100. So someone could have a 52 and they get pointed out as an extrovert, but then someone else gets a 97 on that scale towards extrovert, and they're an extrovert too. But the person who's a 52 is what we call the midline, right? A little bit around the midline. And they really are more ambiverts. And what that means is they might have people or situations that call them out into extroversion, but in other situations, they may be more introverted. So it's really important to know that there are some people on the high end of the spectrum of that extroversion or introversion, and there are some people that are in the middle, and that goes for all the different aspects of MBTI. The second letter talks about how does someone process information. People either lead towards sensing or intuition. Sensors think about details, intuition. People that are high in intuition, they think more about patterns or different ideas or ideology. And so, for example, if you're going to start a conversation with a sensor, they're going to want the details right up front. Whereas someone who's a little bit more intuitive might want you to create a little bit more connection first. How do people make decisions? They're either thinkers or feelers, right? That's pretty self-explanatory. It doesn't mean that thinkers don't have a heart and that feelers don't have a brain. It just means that you tend to lean into one during decision making. And then how do people require structure? People either lean towards judging or perceiving. Now, judging does not mean judgmental. It just means if you're a high J, so let's say you're an 80 and above on the scale of that Myers-Briggs scale, you probably prefer structure. You also probably prefer your structure over someone else's structure. Another J could have that higher score, and you might prefer your own structure. When I see teams that have a lot of J's on them, I'll often invite them to structure brainstorming. Teams that are usually have a lot of high J's on them, they'll kind of rush to execution sometimes, or structure, or strategic planning. And I'll say, it's okay to think a little bit. It's okay to brainstorm a little bit before you get into action, right? So I'll encourage them to actually schedule a structure around brainstorming and ideating. When you know your type, you can basically increase your self-awareness, and then that can connect to team awareness. So as I go through this, if you had an experience with MBTI that you want to share in the chat, I'd love for you to add that. I already have someone shared. Thank you so much, Donna. I've used MBTI for that type of team building. Understand, especially EI, because in collaboration, people do expect a different experience. That's a really good call out, Donna, because sometimes we have to just understand a little bit more about our team members, and then we can customize our communication and create win-win situations. So thank you for sharing that. If anyone else has any MBTI anecdotes they want to share in the chat as I go through this, please pop it in. So knowing 116 types can suggest what tasks someone might excel at, but it doesn't inherently, again, show us how to work alongside each other, which is exactly what Donna's calling out. So you can use 16 types with teams for MBTI with teams for conflict resolution. So for example, let's say a team is experiencing interpersonal conflict due to differing work styles. You can use 16 types to understand the root causes of these conflicts. So for example, an ISTJ might prefer a structured approach, while an ENFP might thrive in a more flexible work environment, right? So understanding the preferences can help mediate conflict. Kathy shared, we use it in our onboarding of executives. We share the grid of MBTI types of their fellow leaders to them and coach them through how they relate to their key stakeholders in that group. That's an excellent creative use, Kathy. I love to hear that in terms of onboarding, because onboarding is so critical. So the more tools and resources you can embed into onboarding, the more successful it can be. Even the aspect of team building, a newly formed team might need to build rapport, understand each other's work styles. So you could take this assessment and then have everybody share their results, and then facilitate discussions around each member's type. You could focus on strengths, potential challenges, and collaboration, and this fosters mutual understanding and respect. Kathy also shared, we use it one level down, where leaders had to pitch work to our founders given their type. That's a really great call out as well. I have a similar exercise that I'm going to share with our next assessment. But so again, these have so many different use cases. I love all the call outs in the chat. I think these are really valuable for you to see how organizations and leaders are using these in creative ways. So the DISC assessment was developed from the work of psychologist William Moulton Marston in the 1920s. Marston's book, The Emotions of Normal People. I know that sounds like a crazy title in today's world. It's from 1928. It introduced a theory of human behavior based on 4 primary traits: dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. So unlike other psychological theories, Marston's focus was on observable behaviors within a specific environment. So the DISC model later was developed into an assessment tool to help individuals and organizations understand and improve communication, teamwork, and productivity. So that's why your DISC type is sometimes impacted by your role or function. So I was once working with a group of architects, and I would really hope that architects are really high in conscientiousness, because they're designing buildings that I'm going to walk into, right? So sometimes your role and your function impacts your results. And then your organization and the way your team is structured may also impact your results. So DISC describes behavioral and interpersonal interaction. If someone knows their type, they know how they prefer to approach problems as part of a team and as part of the specific team they're on, right? So this includes ways for people to have productive conversations, productive collaborations, how to lean into people who are maybe strong in something that you're not. So when we talk about dominance, the people that embody a high D score, these people focus on bottom line results. They're motivated by competition. They exude confidence. They're always going to help a team see the forest through the trees. Now, every one of these types has sort of a way they can thrive and a way that can hold them back, right? So I'm going to talk about the positive for now. If we did a whole workshop on this, we could talk a little bit more about how some of these styles hold people back. When people are high in influence, they're open individuals, they value relationships, they emphasize persuading and influencing others. People that are high in influencing are not only great at creating connection within their team, they're great at creating cross-functional buy-in for maybe something their team is accountable for, right? So they're really good at getting messaging out there. People that are high in steadiness are very dependable. I call them the glue that keeps the team together. They value sincerity and cooperation. They're the people that are going to give you the notes from the meeting you missed and make sure that you have every single thing you need. And then people that are high in conscientiousness, these people are highly focused on competency, accuracy, quality, and expertise. These are the people you want to look at anything before it goes out the door, before it gets submitted to a client, before it gets submitted to a higher up, right? No matter what it is, you want that person with that high conscientiousness because they're going to see the things that you don't see. And so this helps groups of people understand how to interact with different work styles, how to leverage the talent and strengths of others, and then how to set goals for the team to fill behavioral gaps. So for example, if a team has a collective lower D score, what could they do, right, to create best practices to sort of get the essence of if they had a D, right? I can't invent Ds and put them on the team, but what different best practices could they do? So when teams are particularly low in their D score, I will tell them to include more benchmarks into their meetings around goals they may set for a quarter, because sometimes a lower D score, a team can go into rabbit holes and not stay focused on the end goal. So I'll use sort of more benchmarking and checking in with goals more frequently as a cure to that. Understanding your DISC type, again, helps people know how to approach problems together, and then it enables productivity. So this is an example, and if you have any examples of DISC, please put it in the chat. I'd love to hear any of your examples as well. So sales and customer service. So I have used DISC before to work with sales leaders to improve interactions with clients and customers. I've kind of gone through and identified, what does the D customer look like? What do they sound like? What do they say? What do they need up front? How do you open that conversation, right? Like, you don't always know a person's type, but you can kind of guess when you hear some of the questions that they ask. So something I've done is where I've used DISC to train team members in adapting their style to different customer types. So similar to what someone shared earlier in the chat. So I'd have a person who's C sell to an I and a person who's D sell to an S, and vice versa. And I'd have them pitch whatever it is and then have the group of the opposite style basically share their feedback. What would they have liked more of? What did they need less of, right? And so it really helps people in sales roles or in any kind of persuasive role to understand how to sort of pitch out to a different style. And then you use that feedback process. It's a mock sales presentation. And you use that feedback process where the group that was being pitched to kind of gives feedback, and it helps those people kind of make their presentations more diverse. You can also use these during performance reviews to provide feedback. Now, you're not feeding back on their type, you're understanding. So for example, the middle two letters of your DISC profile, by understanding how people create connection, and then how people, like whatever your score is, by understanding that, you can understand how to open up conversation. So for example, you can use this to tailor feedback. A person who's high in S might appreciate a supportive and detailed review, while someone who's high in D might prefer concise and direct feedback. People strong in I may appreciate rapport building before you start the conversation, right? And then people that are high in C may appreciate an agenda of items to be discussed up front. So this personalized approach can enhance the impact of performance reviews. So you're not creating feedback on their DISC type, you're using their DISC type to craft your feedback conversation. We all know performance conversations, can be, somewhat, challenging for people to have, whether they're the person conducting them or they're the person receiving them. And so this can help personalize your approach. Anyone want to share any experience of how they use DISC? So if you think of something, you can pop it in the chat. We're going to move forward with Enneagram. And if you do think of something, though, please feel free to pop it in the chat. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Enneagram. So the Enneagram is a model of human personality. It has roots in ancient spiritual and philosophical traditions. It was introduced to the modern world in the mid 20th century by Oscar Ichazo, who synthesized various elements of esoteric knowledge. So his teachings were further developed by Claudio Naranjo, who integrated contemporary psychological insights. Now, the Enneagram identifies 9 personality types and is used for personal growth, self-awareness, and understanding interpersonal dynamics. Now, I know there's a lot of people that look at Enneagram and are like, what is this? This is kind of, what's this based in? All I can tell you is it's really hot right now. I manage an Enneagram certification program, and I certify a dozen people a month from some big Fortune 500 companies. They're sending multiple people to be certified, as opposed to I also certify people in DISC and MBTI, and maybe I have 2 to 3 people each month, right? So it's really hot right now. I was actually surprised to see it in the workplace, but it's something you should be aware of. And it's something I get requests for all the time, constantly. So the Enneagram personality assessment determines personality type by identifying an individual's primary motivator, the head, the heart, and the gut. So the Enneagram ultimately tells us is which of these motivators or core values shape our worldview, guide our behaviors, and interact how we and influence how we interact with people around us. So the theory is that the primary core values we've learned through nurture, not nature, explain why we act the way we do. As people understand their own Enneagram type, they begin to understand the Enneagram type of others. So Chris, I've been consistently leading 2 Enneagram certification workshops a month that are anywhere from, again, 7 to 12 people on, 5 to 12 people about on each one. So this has been going on for the past 2 years. And again, I will not mention company names, but they are recognizable Fortune 500 companies that are sending people through this certification program. The real thing that I've seen it do is open up sort of some kind of tools for compassion for people. It really does open up some really good conversations with teams. Not every team is requesting it, but I get a lot of personal requests for it. So Vesna shared, I used to work at a corporate law firm and we use Big Five and DISC. I was a Big Five person. My older colleague was a huge fan of DISC. I felt like DISC was less intuitive and detailed, but now looking back, I gave it a spot on analysis of their future performance. He figured out their actual personalities with much more nuance. I mean, you could definitely, you can use them for so many different ways, so many different lenses. Ed shared told me that the consistent organizational wide use of a tool is perhaps more important than which tool you're using. Ed, I would absolutely agree with that. It is about consistency and how you pull the thread of the assessment and incorporate it into actual organizational conversations, dynamics, leadership development. I do think it is important to not just sort of randomly do assessments and not have a strategic plan about how you're going to work with it. Kathy said, I was initially reticent to use Enneagram, but given that I've not seen convincing validity data, but some of the best coaches and best educated coaches that I knew used it. I took 12 days of training on it. I have done some amazing work one-on-one with it in coaching. Yeah, it really does provide really great insight. I have to tell you, I recently did a workshop for a large group of school superintendents, and I had my Enneagram results and I pulled out my report cards from kindergarten. And some of the aspects of my personality absolutely matched my Enneagram, because it's the belief that you do form your type early in life, in childhood. And you could actually see every single aspect of my personality in some of those comments. And it was really, really interesting. And so again, believe me, my background, I was taught a lot about, how to make sure we're using the correct tools. And that's why it's a point of reference. It's a point for conversation. So with the Enneagram triads, the gut, the head, and the heart, when people have an sort of even distribution across these triads, it basically creates an even decision-making lens for groups. So people in the gut tend to think with their gut. They tend to sort of move forward when the mission is clear. People that are in the head triad tend to say, wait a minute, what about this data over here? We have to make sure we understand this first. People in the heart triad will say, wait a minute, how's this decision going to impact these people, right? So you've got a really well-founded sort of decision-making lens here, which is, and as people understand their own type, they begin to understand the Enneagram type of others. They can almost like depersonalize conflict. Oh, that's why that person's doing that. It has nothing to do with me. We can have a whole other webinar on how most people's behavior has absolutely nothing to do with you, but some of these assessments do help people to understand that. So Enneagram can help optimize collaboration when we kind of understand what's motivating people. We can customize communication, and then we can also use this for better approaches to team collaboration. So with change management, when a team is undergoing significant changes and needs to adapt, you can use Enneagram to support team members through change, right? So different types may need more reassurance, while other types, like a type 3, might focus on the opportunities of the change, but a 6 might get nervous, right? Because they need extra reassurance that things are going to turn out okay. So you can tailor your support based on some Enneagram tendencies. There is not one book that summarizes every tool, but I will tell you, if you're interested in learning more about Enneagram, I recommend the book Enneagram at Work by Jim McPartlin. It's McPartlin, but if you just search Enneagram at Work book, it'll come up on Amazon. I definitely recommend that. It's super helpful. It can be also really great to help with managing stress and burnout. So one of the great things about your Enneagram type is it gives you a type when you're kind of in your sort of baseline. Then it gives you a type that you show up as when you're going through growth or change, and a type that you show up as when you go through burnout. So, or when you're in stress, right? When you're in stress and you're feeling burnt out. So what I'll do with people is I'll have them really look at who they show up as when they're going through growth and change and going through stress or burnout. And I'll have them proactively design behaviors and best practices to sort of not allow them to stay in their stress sort of type, right? So it can really be a tool for a lot of self-development that you can learn a lot about. Anyone have any other shares about Enneagram or any other experience with Enneagram? I love that you, Kathy, you kind of took some of your skepticism head on and went into the certification. It's really an interesting and a very fascinating assessment. Again, I did see it more in the spiritual world many years ago, so I was very surprised to see it in the workplace, but it seems to have moved on it. Lastly, we have Clifton Strengths. So if you have anything you want to share about Clifton Strengths, please share. I'll be happy to incorporate it. So the Clifton Strengths Assessment, previously known as Strengths Finder, it was developed by Donald Clifton and his team at Gallup. I am an absolute Gallup junkie. I feel like they do some of the most reliable research on employee engagement and relationships between leaders and teams, and identifies an individual's top strengths to enhance personal and professional development. So Clifton is kind of known as the father of strengths-based psychology, and he was really looking to shift from stop focusing on fixing weaknesses. How about we leverage strengths, right? How about we see how we can leverage what we do have? And so the assessment first was published in 2001. It's now very widely used in organizations to improve employee engagement and performance by building on individuals' inherent talent. So people that are dominant in strategic thinking, they sort of are really good at absorbing and analyzing information. And how can we use this data? How can we extrapolate this information? People that are higher in influencing are very similar to high I's from DISC, but they know how to take charge, speak up. They make sure the team is heard, right? People that are high in relationship building strengths have the ability to build strong relationships that can hold a team together. People that are high in executing strengths, they're really good at getting things done. And so each of these quadrants of Clifton Strengths has associated with it several strengths. So for example, people high in influencing, they may have the strength of activator, command, communication, or competition. And a lot of times when I work with teams, they'll see some dormant strengths and they'll say, what do we do about that? And then I like to, Clifton Strengths coach taught me how to sort of make strength recipes to say, well, if you kind of mix in your maximizer strength with your developer strength, here's how you can access some of what may be dormant, right? So Donna shared, I've used Clifton for balancing team and project assignments. Absolutely. I think that's a really good application. I think, and then I'll speak to that a little bit around application, but it can enhance cohesion. By integrating Clifton Strengths, teams can gain valuable insight into what are the strengths we all possess, where are the areas, where are the gaps, right? And how can we create an overall a stronger team dynamic? And so we can use Clifton Strengths to facilitate team building to focus on strengths. For example, sharing and discussing each other's strengths can build appreciation and trust, while collaborative tasks that leverage complementary strengths can enhance rapport. Also, let's say you're in a situation where the team needs to increase creativity and innovation for a new project, kind of like Donna is sharing. To use Clifton strengths to identify and leverage creative strengths. For example, someone that has the strength of ideation can generate innovative ideas, while a person who might be more analytical can evaluate the feasibility of those ideas. We can start to create really diverse project teams in that way. Kathy shared something about Enneagram, which is 100% true. I agree with this. It's good for coaching someone in conflict with another person. Two people may have had the same behavior, but Enneagram gets to how they got to that behavior. It really does. And I really will say it really is great with conflict resolution, and it depersonalizes conflict again to help understand a little bit more about where people are coming from. Anyone else want to share anything about Clifton strengths or any good experiences they've had? You can pop that in the chat as well too. And I'm going to touch back on to Ed's comment, which is it really is more about the consistency and the commitment to using a tool, and then taking that commitment and that consistency and pulling that thread throughout the employee lifecycle. Now, I know if you Google employee lifecycle, there's like 15 different versions and orders of what people say. This is what the one I like to use. There's some others where development and retention are flipped. But we start with attraction, we go into recruitment, we go into the onboarding phase, which we know is critical. Then a lot of people spend time in that development phase. We can be in the development phase and the retention phase at the same time. And then we have our separation. So what does that mean for assessments? So in terms of attraction, obviously, we know we're not using assessments to make decisions. I did mention that the Kolbe A index, it detects instinctive traits that define how candidates deal with work-related problems. So you can use that just to formulate questions. You would not be hiring based on that, but you can use it to just ask some questions. But it's positive employer branding. Hey, we offer these assessments to support and help you, right? So when we know that people are demanding of what they expect in their job in terms of development, and appropriately so, they should be. And so we want to be able to share that with people. During recruitment, we can use assessments to customize interviews. For example, the Kolbe A index, where we might get that person's results and then ask them to share an example of how they've used that strength or that ability in a previous role. So we're not using it to make the decision, we're using it to inform the interview. So this is a really great question. Christy, I'm going to address it because I want to address it fully as soon as I get through the employee life cycle. So I'm going to put a pin in that, but I'm going to answer that in terms of validity over time. So in terms of onboarding, this is also a great way to help people fast track when their onboarding experience, be able to identify strengths right away, be able to create relationships. So I particularly like strengths assessments for onboarding so that people that are new hires can also have things to talk about for creating goals with their leader, right? So as I come into an organization, it can be really scary. It could be nerve-wracking, right? So I want to make sure I have some great information to share with my leader, or I want to be able to express some of the things I want to get great at. And so this can be great during the onboarding process to facilitate that relationship building and that sort of acclimation within the team. Development is where many employees sit in terms of the employee life cycle. So assessments can help us draw attention to traits, tendencies, strengths, and this can inform goal setting, sort of putting together subgroups for like projects, like we've mentioned, for even not for managing performance, but for customizing performance management communications so that we can have productive communications. In the retention phase, where we really want to keep great people, we can customize recognition based upon what people prefer, what some of their tendencies are. But we can also use assessment results to fuel career development efforts. I worked for a large global matrix organization that put together a giant career development effort, which trained leaders into how to have career development conversations with people. And at that time, they implemented insights discovery to fuel some of those conversations so that they could work with people and develop them in their areas of strength. And yes, even during separation, if someone leaves a role, we can consider the strengths that they possess to redesign job descriptions. Maybe there was a strength missing that we want to enhance this role with, right? bunch of questions. Could you speak to the validity of different assessments over time? Do results change as you age? So I would say that this is always up for debate. There is a belief that like Enneagram doesn't change. I will say DISC absolutely does change because it is based on the team that you're in. And I personally believe, this is my personal belief, I was an ENFP until I became a manager of people. And then I became an ENFJ. So it was either I was going to have to be more structured or struggle, right? So I believe that sometimes a need or role pulls you into different directions. What I will say is this: you never want to keep retaking an assessment over and over again because your own bias kicks in and you start answering the questions the way you want people to see you. So I always say retake an assessment after you've had a significant change, but you're 6 months to a year into that change, right? You never want to take an assessment during change. Let's say you get a brand new role, it's a year later, now retake that assessment based upon you being on the other side of that change. There definitely are significant cost differences, and there are so many places to get these assessments. So there's more information that I can share with you about that. If you want to reach out to me, I'll share some resources as well. Emily, you asked a really good question. I would love to be able to recommend one tool, but what I'm going to tell you is you first have to understand what problem you're trying to solve. So are you trying to up-level managers, right? Are you trying to understand the company's rapidly growing and you need to understand strengths? So you need to first understand what you're solving, and then you can kind of go into the right assessment. I have not used predictive index personally. I know there are people that rave about it. I'm sure it's awesome. I just don't have the background in it. And so I know there's a lot of wonderful people that have great experience in it. And I know it's done really great things for organizations. So I just don't want to speak to it because I just don't have the training and background in it. Yes, Donna, that's a great point. Also on separation, helping people refocus on their strengths to help in the job search. Absolutely. Some people change their types when they retake MBTI. Yes, because they're taking it with their bias. Oh, I don't want to seem that way, right? Yes, on the do the results change over time, the embedded preferences may stay the same, but we learn how to mitigate them or not over leverage. As over time, we understand our emotional intelligence develops and we understand how to leverage them. So I will share with you just a few tools to explore. So, and again, I keep going back to Ed's comment because I think it's so important. So I worked with an organization that did a great job at committing to insights discovery. So when I came into their organization, I was training their leaders in coaching skills, and they started talking about the colors. They were just like, well, sometimes I'm a little too red. Like it was all in their vernacular. They were all speaking about it. They made an investment to get a number of internal people certified so they could create ongoing trainings that integrated the assessment into their learning strategy. And that's why I think it's so important because to, again, commit to something and then kind of go with it. You can't just do the assessment debrief workshop. Honestly, it's burning money. You've got to have a little bit more of a strategic approach to then pull it through and say, how are we going to support this? What aspects of the employee life cycle are we going to integrate this into? Truthfully, for the past 4 years, I've been using a tool called Cloverleaf. They have multiple assessments on their platform, and then their platform also provides daily automated coaching to people in organizations and provides individual and team views. So I was strictly a DISC person for a while. When I found Cloverleaf, someone contacted me on LinkedIn and I started using it, and it's been an absolute game changer for me. And so it does provide actionable insights for people on a regular basis. Now, I also have done a lot of work around Clifton Strengths and around some I brought in some Clifton Strengths certified coaches to work in some programs that I've worked in. So I always recommend Gallup just because everything they do is so tied to research. And so these are kind of, again, the tools that I'm kind of around, that I've been around, that I've seen really perform well and create big impacts. Donna is giving us a high five for insights discovery. No, none of these are 360. Sometimes, again, depending on where you get your assessments, there are different assessment companies that may have a 360. Yes, that's the key. Donna shared pulling it through to get the most out of the assessments. Sometimes it's hard to get leadership teams to actually do the work, even if they say they intend to. Yes, sometimes people are not 100% truthful when taking assessments. The 360 approach EQ has it available to reflect the insight and experience of others who you work with. I think I've done 360 assessments before, and they can be great. Just remember with 360 assessments, you kind of also fall into the trap of recency. So recency is when people just remember their most recent experience with you. So it's not always getting the full picture of people. So while I do like the 360 assessment, if I just recently had a negative experience with you in the past 60 days, but prior to that I didn't, you're getting the recent experience, the most recent experience. And so it can color that as well. In terms of the question of like, how do I know what to use? These are the questions I would ask, in terms of what assessment to pick, what challenges need attention, what cultural trends are impacting performance. Beyond the assessment and debrief, how are you going to make the assessment actionable? This is the most important question that you can ask when you're picking an assessment. What's your long-term plan? What internal talent can support ongoing content development? So similar to the insight discovery, I'm not certified in insights discovery, but the organization that I was working with, they had insight discovery certified trainers there. They had a plan in place and they had a regular quarterly training that came out for people. And then you also have to ask yourself, what structures are needed to presence the assessment in key people practices? So this is how you get strategic, by sort of understanding some of the answers to these questions. How do you use the assessment to assess an organization and or team to join or not join? I'm not sure, Monica, I understand. Do you mean if someone won't take it? Like if someone's resisting taking it?
So maybe Stephanie, as someone's evaluating, should I join this organization and their leadership team?
Oh,
Because
okay.
we're hearing that from a lot of executives who have smoke and mirrors before
Right.
joining an organization and then found out 3 months later. Is there anything to help the candidate?
Yeah, that's really tough. That's really hard to do. I would say that's in your pointed interview questions. I would say that's not something you could probably use an assessment for. And they're likely not going to share with you any kind of cultural assessment results. Like you could say, hey, can I see the results of your most recent employee engagement survey, right? But I'm sure they probably are not going to, divulge that, right? So those are more questions that I think you have to ask in terms of the employee lifecycle. How will you support me during onboarding? How do you manage the performance process and what are your expectations? What resources do you provide for career development? That's kind of where you really have to understand how to ask those pointed questions to evaluate the organization. Some employers, yes, they do post high-level EE engagement on their websites. If they do that, that's amazing. That's a transparent organization. If you want to share an insight or something, an idea that you've gotten, great. But if you have any questions, you can do that as well.
While everyone's feeding into the chat here, I will say it came up a couple times, and one of the reasons that I was so passionate about having you speak on this is that the having the ownership on the entire leadership team is tough, because they're like most of the employees on the team. They're just learning about the assessments. They're learning to interpret it, let alone how to integrate it into their coaching and their leading and their managing. So one of the biggest assets that HR leadership can lend to the leadership team is, one, taking the ownership of it, and two, making it as easy as possible and not having the champion be on the leadership team or outside of HR, have it be someone else in the organization. The easier we can make it on the rest of the leadership team, because that's one of the things that we hear and why we're placing a lot of interim CHROs, is the leadership team communication is not in their wheelhouse. Implementing cultural icons, values, assessment tools, that's not in their wheelhouse, yet they're needing to own it right now. So the more that HR leadership can take that ownership off, and Stephanie, to your point, tools like Cloverleaf, put some automation into sending them an email saying, do this today, or say this to this employee because they need to hear it today, can really go a long ways to helping it stick. Stephanie, I see you've got quite a bit in the chat to go through.
So Vesna shared having a really great experience with the Harrison assessment. So I have not used them, but hey, this is a great way to check something new out. And she shared, because it doesn't categorize people. It tests 175 traits across the range of professional experience. The test statements are entirely neutral. It also tests both individuals and teams for different scenarios. And one of the favorite little perks is that it takes a note of the responses that were likely dishonest. Wow, that's incredible. It really focuses not just on abilities, but preferences, right? So it sounds like this assessment had a really big impact on you, Vesna. So by all means, everyone, check out the Harrison assessments. It sounds like they have a big impact, and they're a little bit unique in the way they are delivered. Monica shared, some employers ask you to complete these assessments prior to joining as part of their selection process. What are your thoughts? Have you seen these used? Okay, so when I was hiring, I was managing a global team of coaches, and their process before I got there was to give people Kolbe and Enneagram. So I came in, now I just, with my background, I know that you do not use assessments to make hiring decisions. And so I'm very, passionate about that belief. Like, there's no way that you could tell about a person's future performance with one assessment. My thoughts are, if they take it, I would honestly ask them, what's the context for how they use the assessments, right? My context, and people did ask me, and I said, I use it to create and customize behavioral interview questions. So if someone did come up as, again, an Enneagram 2, I might ask them, Enneagram 2s are the consummate coaches. They tend to focus on other people and drawing out the potential of other people. So I would ask them, how do you share your own perspective and your own views to get yourself heard? Like, I would ask them those questions, right? And so I would, kind of formulate my questions based upon those results, but I would never make decisions based upon them. They can be incredibly valuable in the recruitment process. Absolutely. Again, we want to be able to ask really great questions. Ed Chair, depending on the industry, sometimes it's hard to get the management team past the touchy-feely HR hesitation. It absolutely is, Ed. I agree with you 100%. People come to me for it. So I'm never usually forcing an assessment on an organization. People will come to me and ask, for different assessments to be incorporated. And again, I have the Cloverleaf platform, so I just put people on Cloverleaf as part of my contracts, and it's an added, little boost for them. And so I don't have to go out and buy a bunch of codes and things like that. So it's a admin headache removed from me by doing that. And so it does, there is something to overcome, but again, I think it depends on why you're trying to use it. Like, are you just trying to use an assessment because it's the new hot thing, or is there really something information you're trying to gain? Christy shared, I had virtually every employee who completed the individual EQ briefing tell me it felt like a therapy session. Luckily, it was a welcome difference from our other programs we had used. I think that when people can get value from something at the end of the day, whether it creates some big giant organizational change, if it creates insight for someone, self-awareness, right, is access to leadership development. So if we want to cultivate leaders, I think that even if we don't deal with assessments in a large sort of organizational wide way, if we're at least providing people tools for self-awareness, they can get some value from that. It's absolutely. So Kathy, understanding the science of it and the validity of various instruments does help convince people. Now, I was strictly Big Five for a long time because there's a little bit more research to support that than MBTI, but it doesn't, sometimes people just want MBTI. So it's like, I'm not gonna, argue with them. But I do actually prefer the Big Five. And I used to use the Big Five when I was doing strictly career coaching, and I would have my clients take it so that they could understand a little bit more about themselves as well.
That's incredible. With that, Stephanie, thank you so much. I really cannot stress enough that it's hundreds, if not thousands of hours of using these, training on them, and leveraging them inside of organizations that you've been able to pull this together in such a cohesive way to provide insights, not just on what's out there, but also what it's applied. And for everyone who's participated in the chat, thank you so much, because it's not just one perspective that you've been able to gain. It's why we created this. You're learning from other HR executives and what they've done, how it's worked, how they've applied it. And I highly recommend, please do reach out to Stephanie. We do not send perfect. You've got the LinkedIn there. We've got it. We don't mass send out presentations because we believe in those one-to-one connections and meaningful connections. I know Stephanie's got a number of resources that she can also share with that. And hopefully we all leave here just a little bit smarter on how we can help leadership teams, how we can help the organizations that we're either going into or that we're advising on how they can implement it. I get asked the question a lot, why do we use predictive index, as most know. I said, it's like going through 90 days and getting to know someone, but now we know them up front and we know how to support them. We know how to coach them. We know where they're going to be successful. And anytime I've said that to a CEO, they've said, I'm in, can you send me more information? It just dispelled all of the possible cautionary things of using the assessment because they want to support their teams. They just need to understand what's a better way of doing it than figuring it out on their own. And Stephanie, you've been able to really give us the lay of the land on how they can do that better and how we can support them in that as HR leaders. With that, I will give everyone back their day. Stephanie?
Thank you, everyone, for the awesome comments and questions in the chat. I really appreciate all the diversity of perspectives. Thank you so much, Kristen and Christine. Thank you so much for having me. And if I can provide any other additional information, please feel free to reach out to me. And good luck and thank you to everybody.
Fantastic. Take care.